Good evening and welcome to Have a Seat with Chris Hansen tonight from New York. And we are going to take a look at a very interesting, fascinating, and frightening story. As you know, if you've been following us here on the channel, we've been out doing more predator investigations, some of which have aired right here on Have a Seat with Chris Hansen. Others are being put together for a television series, a new one, and we're out actively doing predator investigations as we speak, and I'll have some news on that very soon. You also may know, and if you don't, I'm going to tell you right now that we've been doing a podcast called Predators I've Caught, which is available on Apple Podcasts and wherever you get your podcasts, where I look back at some of the most notorious predator cases ever. We find out where these guys are today, what's happened to them since, and we go behind the scenes, and I take you inside these cases, and it's been well received, which I appreciate it. So it is with all that in mind that another very interesting predator case has surfaced, and this one brought to us by our good friend and occasional collaborator, Wes Moast, who is a YouTube content creator, I think among the most clever and creative in the genre today. And this is a case about a fellow named Tommy Lee Jenkins. And I'm going to bring Wes on here in just a minute to talk about this. Then he's produced a very well-crafted video piece that we're going to take a look at. First of all, Wes, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Chris.
So Tommy Lee Jenkins, you can't make this up.
No, I mean, that's why this case really stood out to me is when I first saw the headline of, man walks 351 miles to meet an underage female. That was the type of, I don't want to say dedication, but that's the type of dedication that you don't ordinarily see with something like this. I mean, I've seen people drive long distances on, to catch a predator and those types of shows, but never someone who is willing to walk 3 states.
Well, we've seen a lot of this in the predator investigations over the years, but nothing quite like this, nothing of this distance. In fact, the Predators I've Caught podcast that comes out, the new episode, is about a fellow named Thomas Bodner who surfaced in Riverside, California. And we talk about his past history, his criminal record, and we talk to some of his victims, children he sexually assaulted before he surfaced in our investigation. But this case, Tommy Lee Jenkins, he was first arrested in 2011 for repeated molestation of 2 brothers, 2 counts of repeated sexual assault of the same child, 4 counts of child abuse. He got 4 years probation in that case. We'll talk about that in a minute. Then he surfaces in September 2019. He had been living with a woman as a roommate, and as I understand it, not a relationship-based living situation. And he would occasionally babysit for her 2 girls, ages 2 and 9, who ended up missing and were found with Tommy Lee Jenkins naked in a storage unit. He was arrested, but not really prosecuted in the way that many people saw fit, that he was not prosecuted for any sexual assault, and I'm not sure that one had occurred there, but the charges were dropped and he was put on probation and registration again. Do we have any clarity on what happened in that second case in 2019?
Well, no, and I mean, I interviewed the parents of those children, and I mean, it's very strange. No one knows. The DA has been asked many times by several news organizations why Tommy Lee Jenkins was allowed to go after abducting those children. He was initially charged, and there was a sexual assault charge added. There were a number of charges. He also had some alcohol, and in his previous arrest back in 2011, he admitted to giving the children alcohol in order to get their inhibitions down. So this was a pattern, and he was found with alcohol. And he was looking at decades in prison, and then for whatever reason, charges were just dropped.
These 2 cases, 2011 and 2019, occurred in Neenah, Wisconsin, and in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. He then, after he essentially walks on the 2019 charges with the 2 sisters, he moves to Indiana, then gets caught up in a sting operation put together by ICAC, the International Crimes Against Children Task Force, which is compromised of law enforcement officers from all around the country. And he's caught in a sting for a third time. This time he doesn't get away, though, right?
Yeah, this time he finally got caught. And I just want to quickly add, we talk about the arrest in 2011, and then we talk about the kidnapping in 2019. During his sentencing, during the hearing for this other sting, when he walked from Indiana, they mentioned multiple times he had been caught between 2011 and 2019, being a predator against children, and slaps on the wrist, no arrest. So those weren't the only two times. There were multiple times. There were multiple victims out there.
So he surfaces again in October 2019 in this sting. He's living in Indiana, and he meets who he thinks is a 14-year-old girl online. It's actually a sheriff's investigator posing as a girl. He walks and hitches rides, a combination, 350 some miles from Indiana to meet this date. And we'll get into this in a minute. But first, Wes, let's take a look at the video piece that you put together here.
On October 6, 2019, Tommy Lee Jenkins took the initial steps on what would be a life-changing journey to meet his love, Kylie. The two had met online a few days earlier, but Tommy was so sure with this new relationship, he asked his lady love to move in with him, and she accepted. There were just a few problems. Number one, Tommy was in Whitestown, Indiana, while his girlfriend was 3 states away in Neenah, Wisconsin. Number two, Tommy lived with his mom. He had no money and no car. He didn't even have a bicycle. 3, and this is the most important, Tommy was 32 years old and Kylie was 14. To further complicate things, Kylie wasn't Kylie at all. She was an undercover deputy with the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. And Tommy's journey of an estimated 702,000 steps would take him 351 miles through 3 states, through multiple counties, and would lead him directly to prison.
A man facing federal charges after investigators say that he walked from Indiana to Wisconsin thinking he would have sex with a 14-year-old girl.
Tommy Lee Jenkins had already been convicted of sex crimes involving children and was under investigation again when prosecutors say he unknowingly crossed paths with an undercover investigator online. Investigators knew his face. Tommy Lee Jenkins' first conviction on child sex charges was in 2011. Now he's charged in a new investigation. Documents show Jenkins used Facebook to communicate with someone he thought was 14. Jenkins allegedly told the undercover he planned to walk nearly 400 miles from Whitestown, Indiana to Neenah, Wisconsin to meet for sex.
This should be a simple, feel-good story about the police trapping a dangerous predator in their snare. The problem is, Tommy should have never been on the streets in the first place. Because just 1 month prior to taking this walk, Tommy had walked away from kidnapping charges after abducting his roommate's children. Why was Tommy freed after that arrest? The DA has remained tight-lipped, and no satisfactory answer has ever been provided. My own research about the case led me to the parents of those 2 children, the last known actual victims of Tommy Lee Jenkins, kidnapped that cold night in September 2019.
32-year-old Tommy Lee Jenkins was found at a storage unit just outside Oshkosh in September. With him were two kids who were naked.
But before we go there, let's head to 2011, when Jenkins would face his first real trouble with the law. Back in 2011, then 24-year-old Tommy was arrested in Neenah, Wisconsin for sexually abusing two young brothers, aged 7 and 8. He was charged with 2 counts of repeated sexual assault of the same child, charges that could and should have led to decades in prison. Instead, Jenkins would plead no contest to a reduced charge of 4 counts of child abuse, and he also admitted to plying the children with alcohol. Jenkins was sentenced to just 4 years of probation and a 1-year suspended jail sentence. According to court records, the charges were reduced due to Jenkins' history of developmental disorders, intelligence deficits, and other physical and mental health disorders. He was not required to register as a sex offender, leaving him free to commit further crimes. And commit them he would. During its sentencing hearing on federal charges, the government described numerous incidents in the 8 year following that conviction where Jenkins was alleged to have sexually abused additional minors. But for some reason, Tommy remained free. That is, until the events of September 2019. What had Tommy gotten up to? To answer that, we need to head 15 miles south of Neenah, down Interstate 41 to the city of Oshkosh, Wisconsin.
Squeezed between Lake Winnebago and Lake Butte des Morts lies Oshkosh, Wisconsin. When you learn that Winnebago is Algonquin for stinking water, while Butte des Morts means mound of the dead, you might be puzzled why any man with common sense and a sense of smell would choose to settle here.
On a rain-soaked September morning in the fall of 2019, single mother Melina took a prescription sleeping pill and turned in for the night. She was 7 months pregnant, had 2 young children running about, and was in the middle of planning a move away from Oshkosh to be closer to her aging parents. After her long day, she desperately needed rest, and took solace in knowing that her roommate and part-time babysitter was sleeping in his own room not far away, should he be needed. That roommate's name? Tommy Lee Jenkins. Melina says she had no idea about Tommy's previous arrest history. He was not on the registry, and since the crime had happened miles away and almost a decade earlier, it wasn't something known to local townspeople. When Melina awoke in the middle of the night, she faced every parent's worst nightmare. Her children were missing, and so was Tommy.
News showed Jenkins was found outside a storage shed just outside of Oshkosh without a shirt. Inside one of the unit's 2 kids, ages 2 and 9, both naked, huddled on the concrete floor and wrapped in a wet blanket. The investigation revealed Jenkins lived with the boy and girl and their mom, and eventually admitted to taking them late at night without her permission. Jenkins told investigators he took their clothes off to prevent hypothermia because it was raining. The weather apparently complicated his first plan. A nearby waterlogged tent was found, according to investigators, with clothes, diapers, a BB gun, and a jar labeled moonshine. The documents indicate Jenkins was previously investigated for giving alcohol to children and sexually assaulting them.
Tommy had been charged with providing children alcohol back in 2011, so the presence of it in 2019 around his abductees should have been a major red flag. He was charged with child abduction and disorderly conduct. Days later, a child sexual assault charge will be added. But somehow, after just a few weeks in jail, charges were dropped and Tommy Lee Jenkins was set free. There would be consequences for the kidnapping, though, just not for Tommy. In a stunning reversal, Melina had her children taken away by Child Protective Services and placed in the sole custody of their father. The parents were never interviewed by the media. This is their first time sharing their story. First off, were Tommy Lee Jenkins and Melina dating?
Oh, we weren't dating.
No. In the interrogation footage, Tommy admits there was no relationship.
She lived with him because she needed a roommate. She didn't know his history or any of that. That was the unfortunate part, is she just didn't know the history, and she thought everything would be all right.
What did Neenah do when she realized her girls were gone?
She woke up, normally having our youngest daughter sleeping right next to her, and then she gets up and she looks in our oldest daughter's room, notices they're both missing.
So I was like 7 months pregnant with one of my daughters, and me and my best friend went outside to go look for him.
By that time, the police had already found the girls.
Tommy was arrested and locked up. Weeks later, he was in a new state, and Neenah had lost access to her kids. What happened there?
They took my kids away. They're blaming me. They're trying to get me for neglect. I want to get my kids back, and they're not helping me. CPS is like saying it's my fault, but how is it my fault? I'm not allowed to sleep.
And what about the father? So full of doubt early on.
I knew there was just something off about him.
Only now to see his worst fears confirmed. What would he say to the DA that let Tommy go after the kidnapping?
What in the heck were you thinking? I don't know if prison's necessarily the right spot, but at least a mental facility for the rest of his life.
At any rate, within days of his release from jail, Tommy moved to Whitestown, Indiana, a town with a population of just over 4,000 and a world away from the trouble he left behind. Little did Tommy know that trouble would soon come looking for him in his new home.
Whitestown, Indiana. Not too far to the north or south, or to the east or west. Indiana is in the middle. No one moves to Indiana in search of adventure. Those who listened at the knee of their granddad learned wisdom, that there's comfort, safety, and contentment in belonging to the middle. Smack dab in the middle of the Hoosier State is Boone County, and in the very center of Boone County is Whitestown.
On October 1st, 2019, a deputy working with the Internet Crimes Against Children's Task Force created a Facebook profile, posing as a 14-year-old girl from Neenah, Wisconsin named Kylie Marie. If Neenah, Wisconsin sounds familiar, it should, because 8 years earlier, Tommy was arrested there for assaulting those two young brothers. The officer, who knew Jenkins from his time in the Winnebago County Jail, sent the 32-year-old a friend request. Deploy worked, and Tommy accepted the friend request. His Facebook page was full of two children, ages 2 and 9, that he referred to as his stepchildren. In reality, they were the two children he had kidnapped a month earlier. He was flaunting them. The two struck up a conversation that quickly turned sexual.
We will have sex as soon as you get here, and you will not want to stop at all. You will not have no clothes on. I will need a shower before we have intercourse. Do I get to play down by your vagina when I get there? I want to have 500 kids with you starting in the next year.
Kylie was honest about her age, asking Jenkins,
"Do you care I'm 14 and drink?"
Jenkins' reply,
"Yeah, at your age I was 15 when I got my first DUI.
Jenkins badly wanted to meet the 14-year-old, telling her,
"If I had the money, I would put you on a bus and show you how a dad should be to you."
When Kylie admitted that she had had sex previously, Tommy jealously demanded to know,
"Which port did he put it onto? I want more pictures, but with no shirt, no pants."
On October 6th, 5 days after their correspondence began, Tommy asked Kylie,
"Would you like me to come up to Wisconsin and get you?"
She said yes, and he started walking. The arduous trek took him through Indianapolis, along the shore of Lake Michigan, and up through Chicago. While the media was quick to label him as the predator who walked 351 miles to meet a child, he actually walked a much shorter distance. It was noted in court documents he had a bus ticket for one part of the journey and was given a ride by a kindly church member during another leg. Along the way, he updated Kylie on his progress, sending pictures of exit signs and local landmarks. On October 10th, 4 days after setting off, Jenkins arrived in Neenah, Wisconsin, the very place his troubles with the law began back in 2011. Once again, he was arrested. He was charged with a single count of using a computer to attempt to persuade, induce, or entice a minor to engage in unlawful sexual activity. He was looking at 10 years to life in prison if convicted. During his walk, Tommy crossed several state lines, making his crime federal. During its sentencing hearing on federal charges, the government described numerous incidents in the 8 years following that conviction where Jenkins was alleged to have sexually abused additional minors. Judge William Griesbach pointed out the serious nature of the charges and the need to deter Jenkins and others from abusing children in the future. It sounded like they were going to make an example of Jenkins, and with sentencing guidelines ranging from 10 years to life in prison, Tommy expected to be locked away for decades. Instead, another plea deal was reached, and Tommy will serve just 10 years behind bars, the mandatory minimum sentence for the crime in Wisconsin. He will also spend life on supervised probation and be required to register as a sex offender, but it hardly seems like a fitting sentence for the number of crimes committed. For comparison, you could get 20 years in a Texas prison if you're caught with 5 pounds of marijuana. I have a few questions about this case because things don't add up. First, why were those kidnapping charges dropped in September? Multiple news sources tried getting answers from the DA, but they were each stonewalled.
Records show he was released from jail in Winnebago County, but the big question is why? Because there's no explanation in the records that we found.
Despite all of this, the charges were dropped. We've reached out to the district attorney's office to find out why, but have not heard back.
Matt, do we know why charges weren't filed in Winnebago County for that September arrest?
No, we don't. We reached out to the district attorney's office today and have not heard back.
My next question. Who was watching Tommy while he traveled 3 states to meet a teenager? Was there a backup plan should he assault a different child on his way to Neenah? A lot could have gone wrong here, and who would have taken responsibility for that? A small town police department several states away? It doesn't seem likely. My final question. Why is Tommy getting special treatment instead of actual treatment for mental disability? Jenkins has been evaluated, and he has an IQ of 67, while the average IQ is between 98 to 100. This classifies Tommy as intellectually disabled. Further evidence can be found in letters written by Jenkins to the court. Keep in mind, these were written when he was 32 years old.
I have a dream to own a fishing store one day. I've had a lot of jobs over the years. A lot of people show me how to make money. I hope you can help me make my dream come to life. I know my mom and dad miss me a lot. They lost my younger brother for good and will not see him before God take him home. Please help them get me home to them for good. Thank you. Tommy Jenkins.
Intellectual disability or not, the 10-year sentence is a joke, and the punishment in no way fits the crime. The court would also make a recommendation to the Bureau of Prisons, asking that Tommy be placed at a facility that can address significant cognitive and mental health issues. That prison does not exist, and that help will not be there. A decade behind bars will not improve Tommy's mental health because he still doesn't understand the magnitude of his crimes. Just 5 months into his current 10-year sentence, Jenkins has already petitioned the court to be taken off of lifetime supervision because he doesn't see himself as a danger. The motion was quickly denied. So yes, a bad guy was taken off the streets, and Wisconsin can breathe a little easier. It's just too bad this law enforcement win was only made possible by so many failures within the Wisconsin court system. Tommy Lee Jenkins needs help. He needs years of therapy, and he needs 24-hour care for the rest of his life to ensure he is never a threat to children again. What he doesn't need are any more chances. He used the last of those when he began that journey of 351 miles, destination Winnebago County, Wisconsin, to the waiting arms of law enforcement. There is an update on this case. When I interviewed the parents of the kidnapping victims, it was back in July of 2020. Before completing this video, I reached out in May 2021 to see if Melina had her rights restored. Instead, I learned both parents have lost their parental rights and the children are in foster care while they battle to regain custody. Somehow, everyone involved with that 2019 kidnapping is dealing with traumatic loss and horrific life changes, except for the kidnapper himself, who got away without a single charge.
This, Wes, is just mind-boggling on so many different levels. Obviously, you've got a bad guy here who's, mentally, psychologically not all there. Not that that forgives anything. You talk about his IQ and everything else, but he's still a danger to community. We've had guys like this show up in our predator investigations, and people say, well, he was mentally deficient, or he had a head injury, or, he was only 19, or it doesn't matter. They're still a danger to children, as was Tommy Lee Jenkins. How did he get away with this for so long, do you think?
Well, I think you nailed it right there. It's the IQ thing. It's so many people were willing to make excuses for him over the years that he was able to use that as a shield. I mean, because when you talk about just that 2011 arrest, that should have been enough. But then when you talk about multiple repeated incidents between 2011 culminating in a kidnapping in 2019, this is someone who's been emboldened by the system for so long. And I have the exclusive interrogation on my channel, and it's over an hour long. But when you watch that interrogation, you don't hear someone who's so mentally deficient they're unaware of what they were doing, because he lies. He tries to cover his tracks a lot, and that's indicative of someone who knows what they did was wrong, because he's making excuses for it. And so I really don't know how this could happen, other than Neenah and Oshkosh are about 15 miles from each other. These are small towns, and I think it was just a case of that's just Tommy being Tommy.
Do you think that the investigators targeted him in this last case, where he finally ended up in prison, because of his earlier escapes from true justice? Did they know that he was out there? Were they looking for him? Was there any indication of that? Or did he just surface in this net of an investigation again?
No, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that because that earlier arrest in 2011 was in Neenah, I don't, I really don't know what kind of collaboration there is between the police departments within 15, 20 miles of each other. But he walks away from that Oshkosh kidnapping, and it was 2 weeks later. I mean, we're not talking about any type of passage of time. Literally 2 weeks later, he's in Indiana and starts his walk back to Neenah, Wisconsin. So, when I first saw this story, it sounded to me like it was the Neenah Police Department saying, we're going to right this wrong. He never should have gotten out in the first place. He walked away from these charges in Oshkosh. Let's do something about this. And he was specifically targeted. The police officer who was posing as Kylie knew Tommy from Tommy's time in the Oshkosh jail there.
And by the way, I'm not suggesting that there's anything wrong with that. If you know there's a predator out there, and he's got away with something, it's all legit to go after somebody like that. There's no question, as long as the laws are followed in terms of entrapment. Let's talk, Wes, for a minute about this earlier kidnapping. He was living with the mother of these two girls, and you interviewed her. Did she have any idea about his past, about his 2011 criminal activity, or at least there might have been even more than that, but we know about that? And what was the relationship between the mother and Tommy Lee Jenkins, if we know?
Well, so the mother says she had no idea about his past.
And he wasn't on the sex registry, so she wouldn't be able to Google it, right? Or look it up online.
Exactly. He was not required to register at any time. There would have really been nothing. I mean, she could have done a background check and maybe found that information. But she says she knew nothing about it, and it wasn't regular community chatter. Now, when I posted the interrogation 7-8 months ago, I had people who are from the area in Wisconsin who said they were aware of him, and they've always known that he was a bad guy and that you keep your kids away from him. So I don't know how much of that is the whole hindsight is 2020, and how much of that is accurate. But she says their relationship was strictly platonic.
She needed a roommate, basically.
She needed a roommate, and Tommy was that roommate. And in the interrogation, he admits there was no relationship, but he would sometimes pretend to be the girl's stepfather online.
And he just disappeared one day with these two sisters?
It was, sorry, go ahead.
Was he in charge of babysitting them that day? Or because there was some babysitting going on there, right?
There would be some babysitting that would go on, and that would be during the day. According to the mom, it would never be like an overnight thing. And she had taken, so she was 7 months pregnant. She was having trouble sleeping and was prescribed some sleeping pills. She took a sleeping pill, and something woke her up in the middle of the night. And when she went to check on her girls, they were gone, and so was Tommy. And that was one of the other things, is they kind of treated it like it was a spur of the moment. She had been planning on moving to be back with her elderly parents, and he admits in the interrogation that that's why he took the girls. He was worried about them leaving. So he admitted that this was something that he did not have permission to do, but they treated it like it was a spur of the moment thing. But he had a lot of camping gear and a pellet gun and other things in a tent in a field somewhere, and she didn't see him. So these things would have been carried out piece by piece. So this definitely wasn't something that just happened. He woke up at 1 a.m. and thought he should take the girls. This was something that had been being planned and put together.
And she ended up losing custody of the children, as we see in the piece that you put together.
So that was the surprising part to me. And this isn't, me trying to, I don't know what went on with CPS, or I don't know the details of, but to me, it was pretty crazy that the only person at the time when I did that interview, the only person who had any long-term ramifications legally from that kidnapping was the mom. She lost access to her children.
And you talked to the father in this case as well.
So the father was originally the interview was with him, and when we did the interview, the mother was there, and that's how I ended up talking to her as well. And I followed up with him about 2 weeks ago, and because I wanted an update for my story, and I wanted to see if the mom had her rights restored, because when I spoke to him, they were both fighting. He was fighting on her behalf. He's saying, even though this is my ex, she's a good mom. She never would have allowed Tommy around our girls if she would have known who and what he was. And when I followed up, that's when he reported that he too had lost the rights to his children, and they're both now in foster care.
Well, you don't want to see that happen to any kids, especially after they've been through this sort of a trauma and found naked with this Tommy Lee Jenkins in the storage locker. Obviously, there's more going on here in terms of the ability to successfully prosecute this case from September 2019, and we'll get a closer look at that in the weeks to come, and we'll check into this. But the good news, I suppose, is it's horrible, the trauma that these sisters suffered, but at least they did finally get him. And boy, you talk about somebody who's committed. We've seen predators in our investigations, drive for 4 or 5 hours, take buses, public transportation, all kinds of different things. But to walk and hitch for 350 some miles, I think that's a new record.
Well, yeah, and that's what troubles me the most is that none of that was taken into consideration when we talked about sentencing. As a longtime fan of TCAP and those types of things, I know some of these guys got sentences that were double what Tommy Lee Jenkins got. Tommy Lee Jenkins has a number of victims. He has, well over a decade of doing these types of things, and he's been caught multiple times. How many times was he not caught? When you're willing to put in that kind of dedication, you've been in Indiana for days, and then you're willing to just start walking. He'd only known the decoy for a number of days when he started that walk. This is a very dedicated person to abusing children. And when he's caught and you're talking 10 years to life in prison, and then he ends up just getting that 10-year sentence, and he's not going to a mental care facility that's going to take care of him the rest of his life and make sure he's nowhere around children. He understands what he's doing is wrong. He's just going to prison, and there's no way he comes out after 10 years, and he'll be 40. He's not going to be an old man, and he'll be free to do these things again.
Well, we're going to stay on top of this. It's interesting because I mentioned earlier the Thomas Bodner case, which is out now on the Predators I've Caught podcast, the latest episode. He actually served his sentence, got 15 years from the Riverside County sting. And the state of California found, the officials at the prison, at the Department of Corrections, found that he was still a danger and was classified as a violent sexual predator. And so when he finished his sentence in the state prison system, they committed him to a state mental health facility near Fresno, California, where he is today and may never get out because he's consistently been declared a violent sexual predator. Oh. We'll take a look at the Wisconsin laws and see what those say about this. But it would seem that, somebody who's got a recidivism rate, and no matter what his mental health or his limited intelligence may be, presents a danger to society.
Yeah, well, yeah, and that's the thing with the intellectual disabilities, because I was reading some statistics, and 1 in 100 people are born with an intellectual disability, but 1 in 5 prisoners have an intellectual disability. So there's, when people talk about prison reform and these types of things, I can definitely see where they're talking about where a lot of people in prison need mental help, and they're not getting that help. But that's a different conversation. And until that happens, people like Tommy need to be kept away from the general population, because
it echoes the case of Michael Siebert. Again, somebody who surfaced in Riverside County. When he walked in, I could tell he wasn't the brightest fellow in the world. And yes. I could also see that he had a scar on the side of his head indicating some sort of trauma. He didn't have a big role in that particular investigation, but a matter of weeks later, he surfaces in a Long Beach, California investigation, and we find out that he had done a year in jail for a violent assault.
Yeah.
So at that point, I'm sorry that he wasn't blessed with, intelligence that may help him to have a better life and discern right from wrong, but he's still a danger to society. He still needs to be taken off the streets. And Tommy Lee Jenkins is another excellent example of that. And again, I don't want to crucify law enforcement without, gathering, everything that went into this. They don't want to see these guys walking the streets. And clearly there was an effort to go out and investigate this guy again and catch him in a sting operation. But it would seem that he's the kind of guy, like Thomas Bodner, who should be locked up, or at least forced to undergo some sort of review before he's released, because it's not something that's just going to go away on its own. And I think it's a big problem. And I think this story, and I'm so glad you brought it to us here, it highlights this difficult issue. People always ask, what do these guys have in common? How do we, eradicate the problem? Well, at some point it's demand reduction. right? But if you got a guy like Tommy Lee Jenkins, how do you reduce his demand? You can't. He's wired this way. He's going to do it over and over again. And so it comes down to awareness and a dialogue that we're having right now. So I appreciate you bringing this forward. We will stay on top of this, Wes, because I think, first of all, there's a little more that we need to know about it. And second of all, I think we need to let people know that at some point, at least the way it stands now, Tommy Lee Jenkins will get out of prison. And
he will get out.
Even though he's going to be registered as a sex offender, he's going to continue to be a danger to society.
Yeah, he will get out. He will be 42 years old. You know, if he serves the full 10 years, you know, he'll still be a relatively young man. And I think it's kind of like, if you remember Dustin McFetridge,
sure,
who, you know, cerebral palsy and the cane, he used that to its advantage to.
Oh, absolutely, he did. And you know, we took some heat. He showed up in an investigation we did in Kentucky. In fact, you know, he's on the list to be one of the next Predators I've Caught episodes. You know, it was hard to watch him struggle to get out of the car and get in the house. But when you look at the transcripts, and they're very graphic and very aggressive, and why does his disability in this case make him any less dangerous?
Exactly.
To a 13 or 14-year-old girl.
I mean, if anything, it potentially could make him more dangerous because people will, you know, be more willing to give him a chance and be more willing to listen to his sob story. And you could tell in his interrogation, he tried everything he could to get out of this trouble, and he was using things that had been rehearsed before.
Oh, sure.
It was a lot of woe is me, or my, you know, I'm not going to make it in jail. But he was aware enough to know how to groom a child. So I saw those same things with Tommy, who had a lifetime of using his intellectual disability in order to get himself out of trouble. Well, I didn't know any better, but he clearly does when he's lying through his teeth in his own interrogation.
Hey, look, 2 young girls naked in a storage locker. That's all you need to know in that case, I think. Wes Moast, thank you as always for being with us. If you want more on this story, Tommy Lee Jenkins, go to the YouTube channel of Wes Moast. We will post the link right here on ours. Thank you, Wes. We will see you soon. We've got a couple other collaborations in the works. Take care of yourself. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Chris.
Wes Moast, everyone. What a story. Anyway, we'll stay on top of this Tommy Lee Jenkins situation. And as I mentioned earlier, check out my podcast, Predators I've Caught, the episode out now, Thomas Bodner, and it will blow your mind, not only because of his violent history, similar, in fact, to Tommy Lee Jenkins, but also some of the things that he was doing while he was locked up. He actually successfully sued the county jail where he was, and there's a whole backstory to that. Anyway, check it out, Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. It's out right now. Also, the Discovery Plus investigation into Onision in real life, Gregory James Jackson, continues with a 4th episode coming out very soon. Check that out. It is very compelling. And Peter Nygaard, the Unseemly investigation, also out right now. We've been talking about that in greater detail here on the YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us here on Have a Seat with Chris Hansen. Have a pleasant, peaceful evening, and I'll be watching.